And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the Monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have two of my good brothers. We have the man taking over all of your anime with a pair of hot-blooded sunglasses, good brother Shades, and we have the bane of my existence, the man of 1,000 rooms, and the man who's bringing you up to 10,000%, because we are 10 times better than that fucking prick guy. Good brother Xana. It is March 21st, which literally reads as 3, 2, 1.
Let's go!
No, the only thing I could think of there was Uchukita! You can't hate me for loving friendship.
To be fair, I don't hate that show as much as I used to.
Also, there are worse friendship jokes to make. Hi, Nanoha.
Oh, where's Care when you need him?
Say it, please.
I loved what A was able to do with Nanoha, but at the same time, I cannot escape the "you're gonna get befriended" meme.
I will beat you into friendship.
But for this, we have a different subject matter, and allow us to pour. I would say allow us to pour one out for the two people who decided to not show up, but that's a waste of good beer.
All in general, yeah.
Yeah, there were a couple other people who were supposed to join us tonight, but they decided not to show up.
Mm-hmm.
Wait a minute. You think that Doku is so late and gay he's missed 2 engagements?
This is that a grudgeon? I think that's a grudgeon.
Well, I know one thing for sure. That's a drink.
Mm-hmm.
That definitely sounds like something that should go inside the book.
Yep.
And I'm not even the one who writes it.
But for this, I was very tempted to open up with the whole Space the Final Frontier speech, but to be honest, the Final Frontier is not space. The Final Frontier is sobriety.
No, I thought the final frontier was stupidity, and it's a frontier we'll never explore.
Never explore stupidity. Fuck you, man.
That is an abyss. Once you go into that, no. Stupidity is like a black hole. Once you get close, it sucks you in, and then you can never get out.
Mm-hmm. But
clear.
Now, I am no stranger to loving me some Star Trek in its various forms, and I know, and whenever I should note that whenever people do the Kirk Picard debate, I'm always the one who steps right in the middle and say, "You're both wrong, Cisco."
You don't deny the Cisco. There is a reason I did not put him on this splash screen. He does not deserve to be mixed in with this shit.
I'm holding back from picking up the fermented rotting fruit on the ground that you inadvertently created just now, Monk.
Yeah. But now, obviously,
God damn it, I can't do it. You're no strangers to love. You know the rules, and so do I. I couldn't hold it. You left it right there, Monk.
Here, allow me to help you out here, Monk. Dave!
I might have deserved that.
No, not you, for San.
Old habits die hard. But there have been a lot of, obviously with an IP as big as Star Trek, there's been a lot of merchandising. And while we could make jokes about that as anyone has, I don't think I can out-joke the song parody that was done by the same guy who did the Monster Mash. But one thing I will cover is the fact that there have been a lot of video game adaptations of Star Trek. A lot. To the point where listing them off would be ultimately pointless.
It's much like the Borg. It's futile. It's much like resisting the Borg.
Mhm.
It's futile.
But in fact, it's been steadily put out from 1971 all the way up to 2018, according to Wikipedia. Even if some of them were script games, or one case on the PDP-10, and who the fuck do you know who had that?
I don't even know what the fuck that is.
We're talking relics now. Living fossils.
We're talking early examples of a computer. For the record, I'm gonna put in the console for you guys. This is a PDP-10.
Oh, I know
exactly
I know what a PDP-10 is. That's why I said we're talking relics.
Mm-hmm.
Good God.
Um.
Well, only the most hardcore of hardcore nerds at the time would have used something like that, and yeah, that explains why a Star Trek game got on there.
Yeah, this was around the same time of D&D on the Plato system, which nobody outside of one college in the Midwest had.
Yeah. Ball, the PDP-10 is a giant stack computer with giant magnetic reel tapes from like the late 60s.
I mean,
it's owned by research institutes. It's not anywhere near being a personal computer.
No. This is what you would consider a supercomputer back in the day, in every way, shape, and form.
And the thing is, but when you compare the video game history with Star Trek to its fanboy competitor in Star Wars, one has had a whole lot of very good and very classic games. I'd argue it's largely due to the oversight of LucasArts.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got the obvious stuff with Knights of the Old Republic, but Super Star Wars is certainly no slouch for its time, and Dark Forces. I would pay very, very good money for somebody to come up with a source port for Dark Forces, so I didn't have to load it in DOSBox.
Right.
DOSBox.
Even though it has one of the worst sewer levels of all time, and since we're dealing with sewer levels, you know how my stance is on that. And I've seen some people dismiss Star Wars Dark Forces, even though it was the introduction that we had to Cow motherfucking Katarn, as just Star Wars in wearing Doom skin, which technically, yes, that's the case, but at the same time, it's still Star Wars in the Doom engine. So a lot of the old tricks when it comes to playing Doom are still going to apply, and some new ones. It has a live system, which Doom didn't have,
and a jumping mechanic.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it also had shitty ice physics. But ice boots, so you have ice boots that you can get early on in those stages, so threat is circumvented. And of course, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter needs no introduction.
No.
I used to play that game on my PC using a classic flight stick too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
I was just like
there.
I was probably 9 years old, and god damn, those are some good times.
Yeah. Admittedly, I missed a lot of those games growing up, though I did get the chance to play. I did play the original Dark Forces on the PlayStation, of all things.
I never played the PlayStation version. But so when it comes to its quality, I'm using my experience playing the PlayStation version of Doom. Look, it probably would have been more manageable if it came out after the DualShock had come out.
To be fair, it wasn't all that bad. I mean, it wasn't great. You know, PC version's obviously better, but compared to comparing it to the PlayStation Doom port would kind of be misleading because it was actually handled. This one was handled a lot better. The only thing it was really missing was the cutscenes.
Yeah, which is odd because you'd think that the PS1 would be able to handle them, but I guess they weren't. Well, they didn't have FMVs, so I'm guessing that's the reason why.
Believe the PlayStation, the original Dark Forces didn't have FMVs. That wasn't until the second game.
I'm making a gag at the whole at that whole FMV craze around that time.
Fair point. Fair point.
Because-
But bringing it back to Star Trek real quick, that's not to say Star Trek doesn't have at least a couple of good games on its under its belt. It's just the ratio's a little unfair. But it was funny. Monk, when I was putting together the splash screen for the Monk, I remembered there was like Star Trek Elite Force, which was actually considered a good game. Hell, Linkara loves it to death. So obviously there are some good games out there. It's just, again, the ratio doesn't exactly favor the Trekkies.
Although when you mentioned Elite Force, I brought up two things in my defense when it came to forgetting that. One, it was a Voyager game, so that's already going to skew it again in a form not in its favor. Two, it's a game that it was made by Raven Software. Hallowed be their name. Raven Software, up until they ended up being condemned to the Call of Duty hell, does not make bad games.
No.
The worst. Hell, Raven Software managed to make a movie license game better than the movie it was based on. Because X-Men Origins Wolverine, which they worked on, is actually better than the movie. It's not saying much, but still.
I was gonna say.
These are the guys who were responsible for Heretic, which is damn good. And let's not forget, these are the guys who essentially perfected lightsaber combat with Jedi Outcast.
So they made a pretty good game for both franchises. Go figure that.
Yeah. Plus, Elite Force was made on id Tech 3. The same engine that was used for Quake and Unreal. Well, maybe not. No, I don't think it was used for Unreal. I know it was used for Quake. And when you have that pedigree behind you, it's really, really hard to fuck up. But something that I did, the only other game that came to mind was Bridge Command, which is considered an outright classic.
Mm-hmm.
And although some people have tried to follow up on that whole, in fact, the majority of the Star Trek games that I dug up were in the category of Starship Sim games. In fact, it's either Starship Sim games or RTS.
Yeah.
Although the most recent sim game in that regard is Bridge Crew, which is a VR game, so that's probably why I didn't care about it. But like Bridge Commander, which oddly enough was published by Activision in 2002, is considered the benchmark when it comes to this kind of thing. Although there were a few cases of trying to mess around in simulator form. One was the infamous Star Trek Legacy, which was made by our old friends at Bethesda.
You know what that means?
It just wouldn't seem to last time. It shows people why money flows. It just hurts.
Yeah, Legacy Encounters and were both published by Bethesda, and the idea of trying to do ship simulator on console, because Legacy was on the 360. Look, I know people have tried, but I am firmly of the belief that RTS and 4X should not be on consoles. Halo Wars managed to make it work, but how many other games can you think of that are RTSs that actually managed to work on consoles?
And usually when they try to do both consoles and PC, the PC ports always suffer. The only good thing about Legacy was the fact that they actually got the actors for all 5 captains at the time to reprise their roles for this game.
But a lot of the big problem when trying to do Star Trek in RTS form is the fact that that when it comes to SF RTS and SF strategy games, they were in very competitive markets with much more higher quality entries.
Yeah, there were a couple of okay RTS games. There was a couple. Actually, no, it wasn't RTS. It was just ship sim games that I remember playing that had, good modding setups where you could mod your own ships in there and create all kinds of crazy shit. But RTSs, yeah, that doesn't even really make sense for a Star Trek game when you think about it. Like, combat is kind of the low point of a Star Trek franchise.
And I know some people will bring up the whole thing with the Dominion War, but that's a case of missing the point. Plus, there's been the meme for the longest time that Starfleet makes guns that don't work, or they do work and they're one shot, one kill. So make up your damn mind.
Yeah.
But then of course there's the big elephant in the room who's currently taking a crash on my sofa, and that is STO. Star Trek
yes.
Online. Now, truth be told, the idea of doing a Star Trek MMO was something I was against from day one. Largely because, to quote Batman Forever, it just raises too many questions. The big problem that I had is the fact that you're trying to utilize the theme park format of MMOs and put it in something that is more about team efforts and team contributions. Because of the way MMOs are designed, a lot of the content has to skew towards solo play. Plus, there's the fact that how you're going to do a lot of the content that people expect from an MMO within the context of being a Starfleet officer. Now, if this was done in a more sandbox style, like say Star Wars Galaxies, I actually wouldn't mind that, because that's freeform enough where you could do more with that.
Yeah, with Star Trek, the biggest thing is, unless you're going to go solo, the only way you can really do a Star Trek multiplayer game in general is if you're with people that you can work with as a team, because the whole point is you would be your own bridge crew. Mm-hmm. If you're joining with randos, you don't know how they're going to operate. One person may be the diplomatic one, may just want to, or the explorative one, and then you got the other guy who just wants to shoot everything in his path.
Yeah.
That's not going to make a very good team.
And because of that, the only reason that game's being kept alive is, well, because of the whales who keep buying up new ships. Like, most of the I haven't seen a genuine expansion content update for STO in years. Most of the content updates have just been more ships. And while the ship variety is nice and all, EVE Online has that, and then some. So does Elite Dangerous. Once again, you've got a case of there are other the competition when it comes to this sort of IP is outstripping them. And I'm not saying that those two games are perfect. Both EVE Online and Elite Dangerous have their own problems to work with. But at the very least, they're doing the whole, hey, we've got a bunch of ship variety and other things. But at most, the highest that a lot of the games utilizing the IP have aspired to is mediocrity. In a weird way, it's kind of like live action adaptations of anime. Like because aside from the live action Rurouni Kenshin, can you think of a single good live action adaptation of an anime?
Very few. The list is very short.
Like the only ones I can think of are Rurouni Kenshin and Death Note.
Pretty much.
But you would think the reason, I know it's not exactly a fair comparison to look at the game library of Star Wars versus the game library of Star Trek, but the reason I wanted to make this comparison is you have extremely strong and popular IPs, and yet you would think that would be enough to get people in gear, given how well one of them did in the video game form versus the other. Of course, when it comes to board and tabletop, they're more or less on the same level of each other. Even if Starfleet Battles is way too crunchy, even by my standards. It's like they looked at the overcomplicated schematics for Mech Warrior and said, "Hold my beer." But when it comes to video games, I hesitate to think of one that I could actually outright recommend. And I never got it myself, but I distinctly remember people trying out Armada and absolutely hating it. And one would even think that with all the interest that was generated through the reboot films, that would help an IP get on it. Nope, because the Kelvin Universe Star Trek game was basically Star Trek trying to be Gears of War, complete with the fucking cover system and all.
How is that Star Trek at all, though? At that point, that's what you got to ask yourself.
Exactly the point. That seems to be the problem with most of the Star Trek games, is that the biggest problem, I think, is what it is, and we'll definitely be delving into this more as we get into the main focus of this topic, is that Star Trek is such a vast collaboration of different elements that trying to adapt it into a game is not going to be easy. You're always going to have to focus on one thing or the other in most cases. And that's where a lot of the mediocrity comes from, is that you could, to make a game that captures the true Star Trek experience is not going to be something that's going to be easy and more on point, not something that's going to come cheap.
I think it might be best to make it a form of
Why do we wait for that? Because we're all gonna be throwing those ideas out here in a minute.
Now,
no.
at the same time, the idea of capturing the essence of other IPs that can go in many different ways is still present. I mean, if I listed all the different thematic routes one could take with Warhammer 40K or BattleTech, we'd be here all week, if that. The same applies with a lot of other systems and a lot of other settings. Star Wars can potentially have this exact same issue. I also remember Casey Hudson, in an interview just before the first Mass Effect came out, had talked about how they had built the universe to potentially tell an infinite amount of stories. He had specifically mentioned how the Citadel was designed in such a way that they could theoretically tell whatever story they wanted with it. But even with that infinity of it, with a lot of these approaches, they're trying to tackle as much of that proverbial net as they can, instead of picking a specific direction to tackle within the universe and sticking to it all the way through. And I think that is where the real problem comes in, because thematically let's consider the thematic differences between different series. The thematic, even though there is only a 100-year difference, the thematic stylings from the good parts of TNG versus TOS are very, very different from each other. TOS was still doing is still the wagon train to the stars kind of thing. TNG I've often described as a initially tamed Wild West. DS9 takes a bit of that wagon train to the stars and puts it more in the frontier settlement kind of thing. Voyager at least attempts to be the forlorn hope. I stress attempts because it wasn't successful. And Enterprise, I have no fucking idea. Even after all these years, I still can't nail down what the hell Enterprise is trying to be about, because its creators couldn't nail what the hell they were trying to be about.
Brennan and Braga, what the hell, man?
All critics have their whipping boys, and Berman and Braga will be mine until I'm dead.
You and Chuck both.
And when it comes to the stuff after the even the stuff after the reboot, you still have some attempts at trying to establish the directions when it comes to Discovery and Picard. It's just that their directions suck.
Sorry.
But with a lot of the game examples that we've seen in Trek and other IPs, like Dark Forces isn't trying to. The original Dark Forces was solely run and gun, almost Bond-esque stuff. Given that Kyle Katarn was a mercenary working for the Republic. The Old Republic is obviously doing a Jedi-focused story. But within all these, they're not trying to throw in other elements that don't fit with what they're trying to do. They have a specific direction on what they're building, and they stick to that. That I think is the big difference. And I think consider what you mentioned about Armada. Having the voices of several generations of Captain.
That was Legacy, by the way.
Yeah, Legacy. Sorry. When you've got a bunch of one-word descriptors, they kind of blend all together.
Yeah.
But the point is, each of those series had obviously they had different writing staffs, but they also had different themes, different storytelling styles, and the like. And trying to cover all of that at once is going to muddy the water. So with all that said, it would be kind of pointless for us to just lament this particular problem, especially since it's not going to get any better. I mean, the most recent instance of a Star Trek game that I've seen is a fucking mobile game, which means it goes right into the trash.
Yep.
Because I will have no mobile games desecrating the temple. Nope, not even Legacy Wars.
Makes sense.
So with all that preamble set up with this particular approach, let us have a go.
Thank you, Mr. Blumpier.
So, given the fact that I said that an important thing would be to find a direction and stick to it. Let's consider what direction to pick from, and let's get one thing out of the way first. The idea, as tempting as it would be to go RTS with this, that's out. Going for X, that's also out.
Fair enough. That's
Well, I think
you have to work with.
Yeah, and I was going to say that I think one of the better bases to begin with is a sandbox game of some sort.
I was kind of thinking a similar vibe there, but we also need to establish what the motif is going to be. Whether starting with, are we going to base this on an established series, or are we going to create an all new part of the universe? Are we going to do and mention like Knights of the Old Republic and Dark Forces, which branched off from the main storyline, did their own thing, or do we want to follow one of the established teams we follow? Because that could actually make a big difference in what kind of game we're going to make.
There's two potential options that I'm considering. One of them is is in its own way so I feel that one of the things that would need to be done is the idea of exploring the frontier in one form or another, whether that's in a mobility form or in a static form. Because, and of course, when I say a static form, an example of that would be DS9. Because even though it's not as overtly as Wild West as TOS was, there still is an element of that. It's just that instead of the wagon train, you're in as I mentioned before, you're in a frontier town.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the point I'm getting at, is that what universe we decide to base this on, or what part of this universe we base this on, will determine where the main mechanics of the game come from. With something like DS9, you kind of have to have a mix of I would actually say it'd be akin to something like ActRaiser, just in a more 3D environment, where you have one part action scenes where you go out and battle against the Dominions and things like that, and little missions here and there. But then the majority of the time, you're actually on the station managing things. Making sure everyone stays in line, making sure dealing with random events that happen on the station, things like that. I think that would be a great concept for a game.
Yeah, I am very much leaning on the whole idea of staying put in a base or the like. However, as far as where to set it, there's still one part of the galaxy that's been largely unexplored or barely explored throughout the history of the franchise. And before I continue on, I just want to make something clear. We're not touching the Kelvin timeline. As far as we're concerned,
No.
That doesn't exist.
What Kelvin timeline? What is that?
Exactly. Now that I got that out of my system, consider the fact that the quadrant that we don't see a whole lot of is the one that was used during Voyager. I believe that was the Gamma Quadrant.
No, Delta Quadrant.
I mean, it's certainly been dipped into a few times over the years, but it hasn't really been explored the same way other quadrants of the galaxy have. And for a lot of that quadrant, the idea of the Federation doesn't even exist, which in my mind makes it such a fertile ground for this kind of thing. It may as well be gift wrapped to me in a bow.
And before anyone says anything, the whole point of Voyager's story arc was that they were too busy to explore the quadrant. They were just trying to get the fuck out of there because they weren't supposed to be there to begin with.
So
Yep, they were trying to get home.
Here is what I'm considering doing. Either as this is something that you could say probably takes place, I don't know, 100 or so years after Voyager. The player character in this is because obviously with something like this, having it focus on one character would be the best way to go about it. You are the new commander for the first proper starbase within the Delta Quadrant that's under the Federation's jurisdiction. And because of that through that kind of thing, you have the opportunity to explore this barely touched area.
Okay. It's a good premise.
Mm-hmm. And because since Shades mentioned ActRaiser, I think that sort of mix of action and strategy would be the best way to go about this.
Gives you the action along with the sandbox.
However,
Exactly.
one of the things that would need to be dealt with is the idea of the rank officer going down to planet. We obviously can't do that as much as it's done in the show. It's done in the show for convenience's sake.
Well, here's an idea. Because we're not running something like DS9, where that was just mainly there to make sure that they had control over that area, and it was originally owned by a whole different group altogether. They just took over. This is an occupation. This is our own home-built starbase. So what if we were instead sending out people on away missions, and occasional and getting feedback or getting communications back from those ships, saying, "Hey, this is going on. What do we want to do about it?"
Yeah. Now, in regard to that, I know that throughout the 7th generation there was that whole coming and going of morality systems, but I'd actually want to go with something like that, but on a different route, because a lot of those were doing black and white or blue and red morality. Now, first off, the approach that I'm going with this particular idea is not necessarily morality, but reputation. And this is on 3 axes. You could kind of look at this as one axis being you could say one axis represents a more Kirk-like captain, one represents a more Picard-like captain, and one represents a more Cisco-like captain or commander, technically. The first one of these 3 is essentially the pure diplomat, espousing the virtues of the Federation and trying to mutually cooperate with everyone encountered. The second is the scientific end of things, trying to look at things through a more purely logical setup. And the third is the aggressive end of things, trying to force your way of seeing things on other individuals or other groups. And the thing with this particular setup is that the big problem with trying to do a morality system, as it's often seen in games, is that they try and go for morally gray, yet at the same time write it as if there's a good and a bad response, which leads to a lot of the hilarious instances that we've seen in Mass Effect and others, and we'll probably end up getting to that issue when we go into detail regarding the Mass Effect trilogy.
Being morally gray means that there is no technically right answer, just an answer with consequences more beneficial to one side or the other.
Yeah.
And the thing with this Trinity approach is that there's always some sort of consequence, but there's always multiple ways to approach a situation. Is the thing I'm going with this. And since you mentioned the whole thing with away missions, do you suppose this would be a kind of thing where you'd have to allocate which type of crew members get sent? Allocate whether or not you send a science team, send a tactical team, and so on.
Absolutely. I think that's a perfect way to do it. And depending on which team you send, the certain events can occur. And then even then, sometimes, even if you send one team, sometimes a different outcome might happen that they're unprepared for, and you have to decide how to handle it. Like, again, get a communication back. Oh, like, we went out for this science mission, but it turns out there was an attack. There was an ambush waiting for us. How do we want to handle this? Do we want to fight them? Do we want to run? Do we want to try to talk with them? What do we do?
Beam them back up, nuke it from orbit. Phasers from orbit.
Yeah, because sometimes you could send you could send an away team out for one mission and something completely different happens. You never know what's going to happen. I mean, we're going into unknown territory, so having that kind of thing happen would be a perfect way to test that axes.
And the other thing is that when you think about it, you have I know that the rule of threes is something that's repeated fairly often within game design, but I think in this case you have a perfect trinity that you can work with, um, between military action, diplomatic action, and scientific action. Um, this is where because of this trinity, you could reasonably um, tie things in. You could reasonably take a few elements from a 4X game. But one where and specifically things like tech trees and advancing equipment, because the big question with doing this is how would we rationalize using some sort of resource system when the Federation has a post-scarcity thing where they don't even use traditional money.
Yeah, you'd have to go out and gather the resources needed at different planets. That's why you would go out on away missions. You would send a science team out to this planet that's rich in, trilithium.
Well, there's while I look at these systems a bit skeptically at times, the resource you could be gathering could, instead of being actual physical resources, be scientific understanding and advancement within the galaxy.
Well,
you might go to these planets to investigate a science thing, and the resource that you're gathering is essentially a better understanding of maybe a weird physics blip you're seeing, or a biology never before discovered. It's not exactly the same as an actual resource pool, where you have a limited amount of resources to gather from each.
I know that Imperator Rome got roasted hard for abstracting its resources, but I think in this case
you have to.
You have to do it out of necessity. And one thing that I was going to suggest is doing these kind of missions. The increases the resource called reputation, and you can allocate that resource towards advancing one of the three pillars. Now of course the more you advance into one of these three, getting better stuff in those pillars is going to take less time. As well as mess with other things. One thing that I would very much like to avoid in this kind of thing is when you send people on away missions, don't get a report of, here's the result after the fact. I hate that in 4X. I hate that in strategy games. Or
that's kind of why I was thinking to communicate back, mid-mission, gonna give you options on what to do. Well, you're the commander. What do you want us to do?
Yeah.
And depending on where on that axis you tend to lean towards, you could have stronger influence with certain actions. Like, let's say you're focusing on the scientific path, and you send an away team out for a diplomatic mission, but turns out, hey, these guys are very knowledgeable. They're very scientific based. This alien race you're talking with, but because you've gained such scientific knowledge and focused on it so much, you're able to communicate with them, thus opening up more dialogue trees, more communications to be more scientific, and thus increases the diplomacy for that.
Yeah.
So, things you do will impact how certain later interactions will play.
Yeah. Now, I could easily see the temptation in this hypothetical to bring in some of the more established races, and that's something I'd actually like to try and avoid as best as possible. Like I could see something like the Hero Gen, although I'm kind of iffy on them because they have the problem that a lot of badly written Trek races have of focusing so much on one particular thing that it becomes a farce. You know, kind of like what happens when you have Ferengi written badly.
Mhm.
Yeah. Though, thankfully, we do have some not. This is the one time where Voyager might actually have some use, because they did meet a lot of new races in the Delta Quadrant.
Mm-hmm.
You could bring some of them in. You have some established races from that quadrant you can bring in
Yeah.
to set things up.
Mm.
And
And
if all else fails, you always got the Borg.
Well, and as we established early on, the Delta Quadrant is fairly unexplored. You could always bring in new races that way because of the unexplored nature of that quadrant.
That's the big thing that I wanted to focus on is bringing in new races, more of them, and using that to expand this particular mythos. Now, when it comes to I wouldn't be opposed to the idea of using something like the Borg, but in my opinion, something like that should be used, kind of in the same way that winter is not exactly, but similar to how winter is something to be afraid of in Endless Legend, because when something like the Borg actually shows up on the map, that's the moment where you should be shitting yourself.
Yeah.
In the same way that I do think that a good way to de-emphasize combat is that pushing combat too often might end up with another faction in the quadrant declaring open conflict against you,
Or noticing you in the first place, such as with the Borg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Kind of that actually kind of strikes me as the alarm mechanic from Warhammer 40k's Mechanicus game.
I could certainly see that.
Though we do have to be careful not to push that too hard, making it feel like that going down the strategist route might not be the best option. This is an Undertale we're talking about here. As much as I love that game, if you want to go down that route, you should be allowed to do so without worry. Just know that when you do so, consider it more of the slightly harder route, not the, oh god, this is the worst route you could take.
The approach that I would take to make open conflict a obstacle, but not necessarily worst case scenario, is war is expensive. And
Yeah.
I'd say if somebody wanted to go for that sort of pure tactical approach, they would probably be expending a lot of resources onto that, and because of that, they'd have to be even more of a miser than other styles would. Of course, with a setup like this, I think ideally this would be a setup that would actually discourage hyper focusing on one pillar, simply because of the fact that it's going to screw you. Focusing so much on one pillar of the three is going to screw you over in one form or another.
Yeah, focus too much on strategy. Obviously, yeah, you're gonna burn through your resources like no one's business, and everyone's gonna be out to get you. You focus too much on diplomacy, you're not gonna have enough knowledge of the area, and you're gonna be, even when you inevitably do come across that one race you have to fight, yeah, you're gonna be fucked.
Mm-hmm.
Focus too much on science, and you're gonna not be very good socially, and not be good with diplomacy. And again, even though you'll have the resources to defend yourself, you won't really be as good in combat.
Yeah. Now, a big criticism that I've had with a lot of strategy games is the fact that they spend that the combat is way too hands off. I've mentioned how much I love Endless Legend, and the weakest part about that game is the combat, because you just pick a stance, maybe you'll pick a spell, and then you hit go and watch it happen. And the biggest offender of this kind of thing is the majority of the games that come out of Paradox, especially Crusader Kings and Europa Universalis, where for all the modifiers that you see when it comes to setting it up, at the end of the day, you are making one dice roll to determine whether or not you succeed or you get your ass kicked.
Yeah, that is something you got to be careful with. Here's my pitch for that. When you do have to go into combat, you've got two different types. You can have, basic ship combat out in the field. Like, let's say one of your ships does come in an ambush and you can't get away, so you take command of one of the ships. You'll just basically take the role of whatever captain is out there, and you'll basically fight off whatever ships. We'll keep it on a simple top-down view, not because overcomplicating the game would probably be too much.
Mm-hmm.
But, at least give you some strategy there. Fly around the ship, fire off torpedoes and phasers. And then let's say sometimes the base gets under attack because you're out in the Delta Quadrant. A lot of unknown races. Somebody's going to come to try to take your shit.
Mm-hmm.
Not only there, you can have it slightly different, where instead of controlling a ship, you command the base. You send out ships, and you can have them focus on a particular target. But at the same time, you've got your own laser defenses. Target a ship and fire away.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to this sort of thing, as controversial as this might sound, I would actually like to avoid the traditional approach to tech trees. Because one, it wouldn't work, and two, I honestly think the more freeform approach to tech that's used in the Endless series would fit this a lot better. Because the approach that it has is here's a handful of techs. Pick whatever you like. Once you've picked a certain number of them, you can start picking ones from the next tier.
Okay.
I feel like that would be a bit more fitting for this kind of setup than using the strict tech trees that you might see in, say, Civilization, or hell even Total War for that matter.
Total War.
Although at the very least we can say that we'd probably be able to do diplomacy better than Total War does.
Diplomacy in Total War? What's this? I don't know what you're talking about. It doesn't exist.
No, it exists. It's just shitty.
Thinking about it, for something like this, would a turn-based strategy actually work better for combat?
I'd actually say to a certain degree yes, with a couple caveats. One, hexes.
Hexes, obviously.
Squares aren't going to cut it, and I don't like the idea of this going full freeform. There's too many issues with that. Two, I would say that I would probably go with hexes, but have each individual unit in a hex be able to do more than just a couple actions.
Obviously, yeah.
Simply due to the fact that the reason why you can do a couple actions with a lot of turn-based on grid or hexes is the fact that you have a larger quantity of units. Consider the amount of units you'd have in, say, Advance Wars or any game by Matsuno.
Yeah. Yeah, there it makes sense to limit the actions because you're going to have so many units to command. But here, you're only going to have probably, at most 4 or 5.
Mm-hmm.
Even especially at base defense, you're only going to have a few units to send out. So having more actions per unit, maybe have some free actions where you try to communicate with people, or have certain actions where you can repair, try to do internal repairs while your ship's in the out of danger.
Mm-hmm.
Little things you can do to keep things moving during the fight.
Because the worst possible way to do this is would be to simply have a move action and then some sort of offensive action the way it's typically done in this kind of thing. That would not fly. If a standard exploratory fleet might have one primary ship and maybe two support vessels. And obviously just having that isn't going to cut it, especially since a lot of times with ship to ship combat, it is a case of short bursts and long waits. When you stop and think about it, it's not you're not going to have a whole lot of ship to ship combat that's revolving around being tanky.
Yeah.
And because of that, I would actually argue that going with hexes, going with multiple actions of offense, defense, and support is the best option to go with it. When it comes to on the ground missions, actually those, just for the sake of consistency, I would still go turn based on hexes. Just with a different set of commands. And if it sounds like I want to take some notes from the Siege of AR-558, well, you're not wrong.
Yeah, if we try to have too many different gameplay styles, that's going to overcomplicate things, and that's just going to be a mess. So yeah, keeping it consistent makes the most sense.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, but having a mix of on the base, out in space, and on the ground keeps the Star Trek feel while keeping it in a rather consistent setup.
Yeah. Now, here's one of the big questions. For something like this, would it be better to utilize a established character or a created character setup?
Well, if we're doing it, if we're already planning on setting this 100 years after Voyager, having an established character would be impossible at that point.
That's not what I meant. What I meant is,
I see what you mean.
Should we go with the standard silent protagonist character, or should we go with something like Commander Shepard? And the reason I'm using Shepard in this example is even though you have a whole lot of control over what Shepard says, it is still being said from the background of a career soldier.
That's the tricky part, because both have their pros and cons in a game like this.
Well, actually, I imagine that somebody who's been sent out to Delta Quadrant and a known very dangerous part of space, one that hasn't been very well explored, is going to need to be someone who already has a background within Starfleet. They're going to have the chops to be selected for such a mission in the first place, which means that working with a blank slate protagonist may actually hamper that connection.
What if we were to find a middle ground here? Because getting sent out of the let me explain before you cut me up, before you call me out. What if we had multiple? You can choose from different backstories as to why they were sent out to the Delta Quadrant. Either they are someone who has proven themselves as a great commander and leader, or on the opposite end, have someone who may have caused a little bit too much trouble, and they're gonna throw them out there, throw them out to the wolves to teach them a lesson. That can actually influence certain parts of those pillars.
This is why I brought up Commander Shepard, because if you remember from character creation in Mass Effect, one of the things you can choose is your psychological profile, and a event that happened in the past that got the Alliance brass's attention. One was
a war hero, the other was a survivor.
Mm-hmm.
and I forget what the third was.
And of course, there's also the question of where you came from. Were you raised on Earth? Were you raised as a spacer? Were you there's always a third one. It's been a long ass time since
Colonist.
Yeah, colonist. And those three situations can influence how you go through it. And for the record, as boring as this may sound, the background that I went with was spacer and war hero.
Which, if you don't generate your character in 1 and you just go and you don't import a save when you go over to 2, that's the default. Pretty sure that's the default.
I could have swore the default was you were born on Earth.
No, pretty sure it was Spacer War Hero.
I know that's kind of boring, but I ended up putting my own tweaks on it that maybe I'll talk about down the road. And yes, of course, I went with Fenshep because it was a case of which voice actor do I want to hear over the next month.
I'm Commander Shepard, and this is my favorite store on the Citadel. I'm sorry, the male voice actor is just campy enough that I love listening to him. But I will admit I've put way too much time in those games. I've played through the trilogy 6 times, one on each class, and 3 each of either Shepard.
Yeah.
But the point I was going to make in the end, trying to find a happy medium there, Shades, is that Shepard is an example of the happy medium. Either you have a fully established character that you have no connection to, or at least a small connection to, but they're like the protagonist of a book in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
Or you have a blank slate character that you have all the connection to, but may not have enough of a connection to the story to feel fully connected in the first place. Shepard was someone who, while they did have an established background, it was a background you could influence. And all of their actions from that point in the narrative on were things you could control, which is why Shepard is the happy medium.
Yeah, I think that's a good basis to start with there.
The other this brings me to one other question in regard to this. When you consider all the different races that are within the Federation, and given the approach that we're taking with this, do we go with a default human as the protagonist, or do we allow people to pick from other races?
That's going to be a much harder question to answer, actually.
Yeah, I mean,
going back to our Shepard, using Shepard as an example, the entire reason Shepard worked is because they were a human newly coming into this giant galactic council and proving themselves. Whereas with the Federation, humans are well established and at the top of the food chain, along with Vulcans and a few others. I imagine that what we'd want to do is, if we are going to give choice of races, it's going to need to be established high priority races within the Federation, because those are the ones that are the face. They're the ones that they're going to want any new species you might meet in the Delta Quadrant that would like to join the Federation. They're going to need a face from the Federation to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and once again, I think what I've been doing so far is like trying to see how to work these elements into the mechanics that we've already established, and I keep going back to that tech tree pillar setup because I think a lot of that needs to revolve around that for this to work. And I think what races we choose can also be an influence on that. I
can see 2 of them.
I can see all 3, because we can go one of 3. Let's say just for the sake of argument, we have 3 choices. We can add more later on if we think that we can find good balances between them. But the 3 big ones are humans, Vulcans, and Klingons. And I think right away you can see where I'm going with this.
I can.
Yeah, each of them influences one of the 3 pillars a little differently.
Yeah, humans are obviously going to be more diplomatic. Vulcans are going to be more scientific, and Klingons are going to be more tactical.
And within that, although there is the issue of how the hell are we going to justify a Klingon running a Federation base?
Well, again, 100 years from now, I think we can safely say things have changed. We could easily establish something like that. Considering that at least by TNG, we'd already had Klingons in the Federation, you could say by that point they've kind of had more of a firmer relationship by this point.
Might have finally browbeat Klingon High Command into joining the Federation outright.
Yeah.
The approach I could see if we're dealing with life in the 25th century is that there's a exchange program that's been established.
Yeah, that would work.
We kind of saw hints of that in TNG and in DS9 of where you have people from different cultures in dealing with each other. So I'd say 100 years is enough time for that to kind of establish itself a little bit further.
Yeah. And those three definitely represent the three pillars better than any other race in Star Trek that I can think of. I mean, there are some that could, you could argue that maybe the Romulans could also sort of affect diplomacy.
Yeah, but then you just have space elves and space dark elves instead of space elves and space orcs.
So I think humans would make a better establishment for that, and yeah, Vulcans and Klingons. I think that those three would be the best choices. You could pick other races as middle grounds if you really want to throw some other stuff in there, but a lot of them you'd probably have to establish some other little challenges to them. Like, let's say let's go for Broken Throne of Ferengi in there, and let's see where you can go with that.
That's something that I feel should be tackled in its own expansion pack.
Right?
Say what you will about the whole DLC debates. The benefit with good instances of strategy games is that they will always skew more towards proper expansion packs than they will DLCs. I know there's been attempts to try and do a more DLC-like approach with Total War and with Paradox and a few others, but when you consider the way a lot of strategy games work, whether it be RTS or otherwise, they always lean more towards a full-on expansion pack, even if it's just an expansion pack that just adds another faction. Now, given that particular trinity, I'd like to posit a bit of a theory. The Klingons a Klingon that would be playable would be a representation of a sect that behavior-wise leans a little bit more like the Klingons that we saw in Star Trek VI. As Chuck had pointed out, they act less like space Vikings and more like samurai.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Because the idea with the Federation is a kind of post-Enlightenment attitude, and you combine that with the fact that you have that with a lot of the Klingons in Star Trek VI, you had a very cultured warrior type approach to things. Not everything was just about the typical battles and honor, which is admittedly the reason why I have a very love-hate relationship with how Klingons are depicted, because I don't care for the whole space Viking attitude, and plus the problem is when even calling them space Vikings leaves a bad taste in my mouth, given what I know about Vikings.
Yep.
Let's not forget that Vikings were originally traders and sailors who just decided, you know what? I got a great idea. Let's do this whole trading thing, but let's not pay them.
That's not how that works.
But the point is that a century of that cultural exchange would likely result in, at the very least, a sect of Klingon culture integrating both. In the same vein, I am drawing a bit from BattleTech in this regard because one of the key things in BattleTech's early history was essentially a chivalrous revival among the nobility and among the greater parts of culture in the during even I'd say even before the days of the Star League. The Star League being the height of that, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because BattleTech is a fascinating universe, but that's Rails.
Yeah.
The point is, given how there was the joke in Star Trek 6 about whether or not Shakespeare was originally Klingon, you could easily see that happening with whole swaths of Klingons being exposed to classical literature from other warrior races. And if it's put it in a way, consider what would happen if say a Klingon got really interested in reading the tales of King Charlemagne. Now, could it be argued that I'm turning Klingons into a bunch of Westaboos?
Possibly.
Well, well, I already mentioned that Star Trek 6 made them kind of like that with a villain who kept quoting Shakespeare.
Yep.
To the point that we have Spock almost breaking character with that whole "I'd give real money to shut him up." But I would say that those three would be a good enough start, and while some people might cry heresy over the idea that we're going with the Klingons, I think if we explain it properly enough and make it clear this is taking place in the 25th century, 100 years after the core timeline, I think they'd be willing to at least buy that.
Again, the seeds are already there in the main timeline, with the events of both TNG and DS9. I mean, Worf alone kind of already sets that tone up with how much he influenced the Klingons during his time.
Mm-hmm.
You could easily say that things have evolved from there 100 years later.
Yeah. Now, this does lead to one other issue, and that is the fact that, since for all intents and purposes you are playing as a Starfleet commander with this, which means that there are certain things you have to adhere to. So it's time for me to address the other elephant in the room, and how are we going to tackle the Prime Directive?
I was wondering if we were going to bring this up. The good old Prime Directive.
Now,
Their go-to excuse for when they don't want to do it.
Now, I want to make one thing clear on this. The Prime Directive is a case of time decaying the idea, because the original concept, it was within good intent. I find that having it be a hard and fast law, and Chuck has talked about this extensively, is where you see the real problems when you have instances where it's something that it's the most important rule ever, and you cannot break or bend or grind at it. It works at its best when it is a guideline, a don't fuck up kind of thing. Especially when you consider that the times that captains have violated the thing, they had legitimate reasons for doing that, and hell, Picard basically took people's strict adherence to the whole thing and roasted it over an open fire.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of what we should do here. we should have instances where, you get a warning if you like pick a dialogue up, if you do something that would violate the Prime Directive, but you can still go through with it. Like, listen, this might violate the Prime Directive. There might be consequences for doing so, but you can continue to do it. And sometimes, you take a risk every time you do that.
Mm-hmm.
You do it too often, obviously, yeah, we're going to, Starfleet's going to start asking questions. But if every once in a blue moon, if this situation comes up where violating the Prime Directive might not be a bad idea, you can get away with it. And oftentimes, when you do that, it might actually be to your benefit.
Yeah. I'd say if somebody violates it blatantly too many times, it's the first instance of a warning is, say, an event where you're summoned for a tribunal. You're effectively you're being court-martialed, and the worst case of it is you being deemed unfit for command, and that's your game over status.
Yeah.
Now, this is the thing that I keep coming back to with this is that a lot of it is going to fall on reputation being the primary resource. As tempting as it would be to have resources in a similar vein that you'd see other strategy games work with, I don't think that would be applicable because there would be too many different types of resources to track.
Yeah, when I brought this up earlier, I do agree with what Xana said earlier, and I think having missions where you quote unquote go out collecting resources should be a thing, but I don't think you should actually have to collect resources. Let me go ahead and clarify that idea. But have scientific missions where you go out and hunt for new resources and maybe discover new materials, but you don't actually have to keep track of what resources you have. Mm-hmm. You just have those missions because you would do that.
That's why I do think that initially I was thinking of having a universal reputation resource, but upon further thought, I've come to realize maybe it's best to split this among the trinity that we've established.
Scientific points, tactical points, diplomacy points,
Mm-hmm.
Things like that.
And something else that I'd considered on this is being able to transfer points from one to the other on a 2-to-1 basis. So 2 points of, say, tactical could be diverted over to one of the other 2 pillars, but it only counts as 1 point each. The big reason that I'd want to do this is you've probably with a lot of games that involve some sort of resource management, there are instances where you have plenty of resources, but you have the wrong kind of resource to determine English. You have the wrong kind of resource for what you actually need. If you want the simplest example of this kind of thing, are you familiar with the term mana flooded from Magic the Gathering?
I don't play much MTG, but I think I've heard that term.
I remember when Mana Flood used to lead to a thing called Mana Burn. Remember when Mana Burn was still a rule?
Pepperidge Farm remembers. And incidentally, this is that whole mana setup is one of the reasons I actually defended Duel Masters, because everybody was saying it was just an Animu version of Magic. No, it fixed the one problem they had with Magic, having lands be their own card. Since any card can feasibly be a land with Duel Masters, you don't run into this problem.
The Final Fantasy card game does the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Any card can be a resource, and you can shine and de-shine the cards in order to spend that resource.
Because Magic had the problem in 2 forms. You could be mana screwed, where you have a bunch of cards that you could use, but you don't have the resources to spend it. Or mana flooded, where you've got way too many lands out and nothing to use them with.
Yeah, good old mana flooding. I love it when an enemy gets mana flooded in the first couple rounds, because then you just raffle stomp.
Mm-hmm.
Usually that leads to a scoop.
So when someone's mana flooded, they end up spending several turns not being able to do shit while their opponent keeps taking pot shots at them.
Yep. Usually you see a scoop within 2 turns. If someone ends up with a lot of land in hand, they think, oh, well, my deck's thinned. Now I will probably pull some good cards. And that's usually the case. But this is all rails.
Yeah.
I understand that you want that trade between all of the particular resources in order to prevent resource flooding or screwing.
Mm-hmm.
Which is understandable.
Yeah.
Now when it comes to utilizing the resources, I've already talked about doing a tech pool instead of a tech tree. I think that's something I'd want to stick with. The other thing is how those resources are utilized. Should it be a case of just buying the thing outright, or the whole research and time method that's often used in strategy games?
That's hard to answer, to be honest.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different ways that could be implemented that either way would work. But then you've got to weigh the pros and cons of what each one is going to end up with. There's a lot to it, in fact.
Mm-hmm. I would say the idea doing a straight buy. I'd say that should be treated as a more of a desperation move. You can get this thing quick, but it ain't gonna come cheap.
Yeah, you're going to spend a lot to do it.
Yeah, I think that'd be a better way to handle it.
Or you can allocate your staff to research and get it done within a set amount of turns. The more turns that it takes, the less it's going to cost you. But obviously, taking the slow route means you're gonna be taking a while, and everybody's not gonna be just sitting pretty while you do it. So
leave the buy it now option always as a secondary option connected to that. You allocate your researchers, and they take a certain amount of time, depending on how many you've allocated, and how much resources you're willing to put in per tick, whatever tick unit we're going to be using. And then to the side of that, hey, if you need this thing absolutely positively right now, here's the buy button. But you can see it's expensive.
yeah. And don't worry, I'm not referring it as a buy button in order to force in MTX or some shit. We're better than that.
Fuck that noise.
No microtransactions are required here. You just have a buy button that allows you to spend the resources you've allocated.
Mm-hmm. But once again, one of the big themes that we've had with this is that there are no purely best decisions. Every decision has some sort of drawback that could potentially bite you on the ass.
You have to make a decision in the time that you are there,
mm-hmm.
as to whether you would like to perform one or the other of the two
now
or 3 decisions you may have to you.
A while back, I did an interview with the developer of Alliance of the Sacred Sons, which is actually a fascinating take on the idea of a RTX or grand strategy game. One of the things that they're proposing in their system is a AP based approach where there's a certain number of actions that you can take, but you can't give orders to all the units that you have at once. I'm thinking that we take a similar approach wherein if we go with a turn being the commander acting in a certain amount of time, that they only have so many actions they only have so much time to divert their attention to whatever's going on when it comes to sending people out or whatnot.
So every turn has an action economy. Is what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Here's an idea. Once again, I always like finding middle grounds, and I think I've got one for this. Because, yeah, you're gonna be the commander, but you're not the only person in charge. You're gonna have, high rankings above below you that you can command. You have set amount of commander actions, stuff that specifically you do. But you can also have your staff delegate other tasks that you feel may not be something you need to focus on. You can have certain chiefs. You can have a tactical chief focus on improving defenses. You can have a research chief focus on research. You can have medical staff. You can have diplomatic chiefs, just all these different people below you that you can have them take care of the menial stuff. And again, that can lead to other events where you may have to step in. But then have specific things that you do. You issue out a specific command. You tell this away team that you have this specific away mission you want done. You have a certain research that you want done. That way, everything. That way, you have a nice balance between everything.
This is starting to sound like the management system of a 4X.
We are
In a way,
we're
we're taking elements, but we're not going all in on the idea.
We're not.
I know.
going
I'm just
full-
saying the management system is all.
To be quite honest, we kind of set ourselves up for that kind of thing when we said that we weren't going to be doing the whole wagon train exploring the stars approach.
Yeah, I mean, and ultimately, if we hadn't put in the restriction of no 4Xs, no RTSs, a 4X would be a perfect setting for just about any Star Trek game. But that's because space exploration tends to sit really well in 4X.
The reason why I initially made that crack about no pure 4X is because if we were to do a 4X in the traditional route, the way that it would have to be contextualized is you're running the Federation, and that would introduce more problems than is worth.
Well, I mean, you're running the Federation in Delta Quadrant. You could contextualize it that way. You're the Commodore that's been put in charge of getting the Delta Quadrant under Federation control. But that's neither here nor there again, since we're not doing pure 4X.
Mm-hmm.
No, I love the fact that we're taking elements from different things, because the whole you are the commander, but you can either micromanage or you can delegate, which is a big staple of 4X. Is a great way to run a ship as well. Anything that has a hierarchy, in fact, can be run that way.
Yeah, I think the main idea is that we are a commander. So that should be the feeling we have playing this game, that we are a commander. And a commander is not going to be a one-man wrecking crew just doing everything himself. That's not how it works. So to give that feel, you have to be willing to delegate tasks.
It works that way when you're Cisco, but that's different.
Even Cisco had people doing stuff for him, okay? It's just he was a lot more hands-on.
Very, very little. And when you said not a one-man wrecking crew, I'm like, no, Cisco absolutely is a one-man wrecking crew. Regardless. You're right. You need to be. It's to give you the sense of you are a person in charge, and thus, as part of one of the responsibilities of leadership, is to learn efficient delegation.
But we got to do it in a way that's fun to do. So yeah, having the commander actions would probably be a nice balance to give us stuff to do, and not just say, "Okay, you do that, you do that, you do that. Okay, I'm going to bed now."
Mm-hmm.
Having fun stuff to do and not sitting in a management screen for 2.5 hours setting up the exact proper ratio of managers across your galactic empire so that it continues to run and your war economy doesn't break. I'm sorry, I'm just blabbering about early Stellaris these days. Sorry.
Look,
oh my god.
Stellaris traumatized him.
Clearly.
Not traumatized. Pissed me off, but that's a different story that we won't get into right now.
Fair enough. But the point is, yeah, we're not gonna go down that route. We want to find again, I am a man of balance. Balance is always what I seek, and that is what we seek here.
You know, everything is balanced when it's all on the floor. I can knock over your scales anytime I want. But yeah, the having an action economy and a specific set of orders that are uniquely the commander's compared to what he can delegate away are both good ways to continue engagement, as well as giving limitations to a turn. And you know, part of that also reminds us of other semi 4X games, such as an action economy specifically. Reminds me a lot of something like Civ, early Civ.
Yeah.
During one turn, you assign some building actions, you assign some unit actions, and then you see what happens as the turn goes around, and then you react to everything that happened while it wasn't your action time.
And when it given that I do think that the exception to that whole approach is when things go down on away missions. Do you suppose, because the idea, like I said, we wanted to avoid the idea of just getting the after reports of an away mission a few turns after you sent it out.
I have a middle ground there that I think Shades might like, especially since we came upon the ActRaiser idea so early into this. When you're getting the periodic mission updates from the away team, if there's a crisis that you have to make a decision on, you should have a few decisions, and then you should have a fourth option of basically transfer to whoever's commanding the away mission and controlling it manually from that point on. But the downside would be you couldn't do any of your commander actions for your captain until the away mission finished.
Ooh, I like that.
Because it's a sacrifice. You want to micromanage this away mission, go ahead and micromanage this away mission. But what this essentially is the commander is at the comms, and he's giving orders to, as the situation continues, rather than focusing on other duties he may have. And that's why you get to control the away team while they're down there. And it'd be like an ActRaiser mission level there, an action level where you'd control them going around, and those action fields wouldn't all necessarily be combat. You could do it with maybe the away mission you're on is find the source of anomalous reading that long-range sensor probe found when we came into system. And so now you're searching a level for a specific goal, and maybe you have to interact with some of the wildlife, maybe you have to interact with some of the flora, maybe there's even a rudimentary civilization down there, and you have to choose whether violating the Prime Directive is a good idea to find the source of this anomalous signal.
Yeah, and you can have a choice. You can have a choice between letting your captain make the call and have a little bit, give them an idea of what, based on what captain you sent out, and what they specialize in, what their success rate would be. Giving an extra command here or there, or full on micromanaging it.
And but the sacrifice for micromanagement is you lose out on time aboard the ship.
Exactly. You can use two commander actions to take over the mission.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say something else to consider is that throughout it there should be some degree of consequence. But I know I mentioned the whole tier thing. Do you suppose how much time do you suppose a single turn should be? I doubt we're gonna have it where a single turn is a year, because, well, near end game, we'd end up having people having to justify how the hell somebody is several thousand years old.
Yeah, I'd say probably a week would probably be a good amount.
A week does sound right because that allows for those that whole original homage to a 5-year mission being quite a few turns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as for turns not being a year, if we're considering play styles, because this is going to be a game that we want people to enjoy in many different fashions.
Mm-hmm.
What we've been discussing here is exploring Delta Quadrant and establishing a presence within it thereof. Perhaps there could be a different play style, a different play mode, where the presence has been established. Now you have a centralized space station, a la DS9, and you're attempting to spread influence from that centralized point and make it a hub. That could be where the turns take maybe a little longer, maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month. And you wouldn't have to justify someone being several thousand years old by the end of the mission. That's where the whole, oh yeah, this guy's coming to the end of his days, he's retiring from Starfleet, here's the new officer. And almost like the lineages from some of the 4X games out there, like Crusader Kings. I'm sorry, the lineages in that one are kind of fucked up.
Yeah.
Oh yes, they are. I could kill you all from laughing just reading off the many ways that my descendants in Crusader Kings either got fucked, or got killed, or all three at the same fucking time. Exactly.
That's my point.
Now,
but that's the same type of thing. You've gone from one type of play where an exploratory team on a long mission ship is establishing a foothold in Delta Quadrant, and then you have another play style where the foothold, the beachhead, is established. You're now expanding influence.
Yeah.
Now
You
that
could
brings
even-
me to-
Let me I just
Go
got
ahead and finish.
a last
Go
little
ahead and
point
finish.
here, Shades.
Go ahead.
This could even, if you really wanted to, set what we could call long-term campaign mode, where you finish your mission on the ship and are the first Commodore of the space station, and then just continue through there. But that would be, for those 4X and other fan tryhards who want to play a game that lasts 5 years in real time.
Yeah, that could probably be something we could do as a DLC, an expansion pack DLC kind of thing.
That's for those Dwarf Fortress tryhards out there.
Yeah, but the other thing we should also establish, because having the main goal of exploring the Delta Quadrant is great and all, but a good story always has to have a central narrative, and we probably should establish something like that. Just something that goes on that becomes the doesn't take over the gameplay or the mechanics or the narrative, but it's something that goes alongside it. Yeah, you discover something going on, and that becomes like the central point of investigation.
So you want an end game?
Oh, at least for the main campaign, yeah. I think that's kind of essential.
Now, doing the board game style victory wouldn't exactly fit here, because with a lot of 4Xs, the end game is basically you survived, or in the case of Crusader Kings, is the end game is you're dead and your descendants are dead.
And in the case of Stellaris, before Paradox messed some things up, your end game was, hey, there is some extra galactic threat. Better wipe it out.
Yeah. Obviously, we don't need to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Psychic warp zombies. That's all I have to say. Psychic warp zombies.
I think for something like this, it has to be something that you can use the 3 pillars as a way to resolve whatever conflict. Honestly, I think the best comparison would be the Master in the original Fallout, where depending on which route you take can change how you quote unquote defeat the final encounter.
Make him kill himself.
I don't think we'll go that route, but yeah, you get where I'm going with it.
Your entire plan is a failure. Go become an hero. Okay, better guess. Guess I'd better die. Because that was that ending.
I know.
You talk to him and tell him he's a fucking failure, and he's like, best guess I better die.
Yeah, obviously we won't go that far with it, but have a scientific, tactical, or diplomatic ending, depending on which route you've tended to favor.
Yeah, that could work. That could work, and then have a true ending. You get all pillars to max level.
I don't know if that'd be the greatest of ideas. I don't know how that would work, but I'm sure we could set
the same way it worked with Mass Effect 3, don't you know?
Oh, yeah, that worked real well, didn't it?
We are not talking about that right now. That is a subject for another day.
I know. I'm waiting.
Well, for the meantime,
Put your motherfucking head back down, dummy!
You can't take any jokes. Everyone's a critic. No respect.
well, I am definitely a critic. That's my fucking job.
So am I. But given that is something I'd be willing to go with that, but I do want to make one thing clear. I do not care for the idea of having the big bad that we'd build to be the Borg.
Yeah, it's kind of
make it something the Borg are scared of.
No, because then that's a whole new can of worms.
There is one. Although when it comes to something that the Borg are scared of, that does bring one particular species that didn't really get talked about much, and could be utilized in that form.
Because they are in Delta Quadrant.
Yeah. I forget the Borg gave them a species number, and years ago they showed up in STO as the Undyne.
Yep.
I think it's number species 42. I think
42781. I think it was.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Don't quote me on that.
It was a 4-digit number. I'm almost sure of it. 8472. I'm pretty
8472.
sure.
That sounds about right. I'm actually double checking right now because I know one of the episodes of Voyager was specifically labeled that number.
Species 8472. I'm almost sure.
That does sound about right. Okay, maybe they didn't. Huh.
I mean, you can always check Memory Alpha if you really want to try and find the source.
8472.
Oh man, there's that useless steel trap mind for dumbass trivia that coming into play again.
Hey, we all gotta be good at something, right? Even if it's completely useless.
Wait, are you saying Aqua is good at something?
Heh.
Well, technically she was. She just wasn't useful for anything good.
But given that we could use that as an instance of one that is a significant encroaching threat, because there were two that I was considering, and unfortunately one of them just wouldn't work, because the other one I was thinking was some sort of force that worked similarly to the Dominion.
But doing that same thing twice would probably get a little repetitive.
Yeah. However, because of how little is known about the Undine, aside from the fact that the Borg are scared shitless of them, they're essentially a blank slate that we can utilize. Especially since the canonicity of STO is non-existent.
Questionable.
Since Memory Alpha is the most canon of the wikis. We do know certain things about species 8472. They're in a fluidic space, quote unquote, which is only accessible through a quantum singularity. The technobabble! My heart!
It wouldn't be Star Trek without at least a little bit of it.
But we do know certain enough things about them to know that they have a weakness, and Voyager would have reported that. So I don't think the Undine would have been a suitable end boss, essentially.
And I don't care for the idea of using the Borg as an end boss. I see using the Borg more in the realm of using, say,
a harasser. They're a harassment system.
Yeah. Like the barbarians in Civilization.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They're a nigh unkillable force. Even if you take one of them down, odds are good you're not walking away from that battle unscathed. So you save those for like an oh shit situation.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if you focus too much on tactical, you're going to eventually draw their attention, and that's going to lead to an epic confrontation with them at your base, which you do not want.
Unless you've been preparing for it.
No.
I could see some min-max builds where they just get enough resources to pump tactical, wait for the Borg to show up, and kill them for all the goodies the Borg will have.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a risk-reward thing there, you know.
I've never played a system with different tiers.
I'm not going to
stop. What are you talking about?
I'm not going to stop somebody from doing that. It's just a case of, well, you want to do that? You're going to have to deal with the consequences of it. Because otherwise we'd be massive hypocrites. Because how many times have we tried to break games that we own?
No, never. I always play as intended, Monk. Always.
Yeah, sure. I always play the game the right way as I sit here with my cheat mods.
I wasn't even going with... Shades, I'm sure you have never attempted a genocide run, Shades. Definitely not.
Actually, I can say I have never done a genocide run.
Never done or never completed?
Never done. Never even attempted it.
Although since you've probably seen videos of the Sans fight, that was probably a good reason for you not to try.
Yeah.
I've never done a broken alchemy enchanting build in Morrowind. Never! I've never given myself an athletics and an acrobatics so high that the game crashes. No! Never!
Hell, I've seen my wife set up an archery build in friggin' Skyrim to the point where she could snipe a guy from a mile away, barely able to see him, and yet pinpoint accuracy crits him.
Stealth Archer in Skyrim is overpowered.
I'm just putting this out there now. If I ever run Dark Heresy and Lady K is involved, I'm going to explain to her about the wonders of the Vindicari assassins.
Oh yes, encourage her, please.
There's no min-maxing in Dark Heresy. You either roll really well or you die.
Don't spoil the fun. Because look, she can't get at me, and she can't get mad at Shades if the dice gods decide to screw her over.
RN Jesus does not save. How many times do we have to say that?
Monk, you know my wife as well as I do to some extent. You know that wouldn't stop her.
Well, I know, and I know that the only recourse would be to try and fudge the roll, and that's not going to happen.
I'm just saying. Anyway, Rails.
Yeah. But I would argue that we would need to introduce a new type of alien that is definitely on the hostile end of things, but something that is slowly built up as this boogeyman that nobody wants to deal with. Now
Make it so that there's maybe as they start coming in to the system, which I would guess is mid to mid late. When you, let's say the Borg are tracking you for whatever reason, because they're the harassers,
Mm-hmm.
and then some innocuous little ship comes into the system that the Borg are harassing you in, and the Borg leave. Like, that doesn't seem like a big thing. It's just one tiny ship. The Borg are leaving. Maybe they just got tired of chasing you around. It's happened before when nothing else has shown up. You've run far enough, and they've just decided, I don't want to deal with this. So maybe you think you've run away far enough. Maybe. And maybe you go and interact with that ship. Maybe. Or maybe you're genre savvy and you run like hell. Reward the people who have more than a modicum of common sense. Run!
Either way, the story is something about this seems off. Let's investigate.
Yeah.
Or I've seen too many horror movies to know where this is going. Fuck y'all, I'm out.
Oh, that's a game over right there.
But I'd say as it goes on, navigate now having this choke out resources. I think that would cheapen the experiences that you've been largely the comfort zone that you've been dependent on up to that point. I think instead, what this should do is make it harder to maintain the network that you've likely established as you get higher on in tier.
So you start seeing parts of the network slowly go dark or fade out for a little while, things of that nature.
Yes. Or there are certain problems that keep showing up, and now, as tempting as it would be to have it that this is a creature that exists exists in and out of normal space, that's way too technobabbly for us. I do like the idea, however, of a species that can naturally exist within subspace. The idea,
Maybe perhaps something that they like when one of your ships goes into a warp, maybe comes across it and sees something on the radar.
yeah, but when they get out of warp, it's gone.
Yeah.
The idea because obviously warp travel is something that every advanced species depends on in one form or another. To the point that the dividing line between when it comes to assessing civilizations is pre and post warp. Given that as the framework, the idea of essentially, for lack of a better term, let's refer to this as a warp ghost.
Well, yeah. Freak the hell out of anybody amidship.
Yeah, and oddly enough, with something like this, we are taking a well-established trope when it comes to the mythos that we see in the Age of Sail, that of the ghost ship.
Yeah.
And we're putting it in a more SF approach. This is a ship. These are beings that seem to always show up in subspace, but when people try and look for them in real space, it's like they don't exist. And that's why I'd say that an early dropping of a hint with this kind of thing is in, say, the diplomacy end of things, where you're being warned about the watch out for the specters.
Are ghosts amongst this part of the galaxy? Beware, beware.
Yeah. It sounds cheesy, but keep in mind, because of the limited kind of experience that people would have with these things, the best that you would have are tall tales.
Not only tall tales, but the explanation wouldn't even be like it's a ghost. It'd be there's always been some weird sensor issues, especially during warp travel out here.
Mhm.
Just
Or
be
hell, you
careful.
could-
That can lead to we've seen ships get lost because of it.
Or hell, just start it off with like, some idiot in a bar rambling on about it, or some Christ prophet type thing, one of those kind of deals.
Mhm. And I'd say as it goes about, you start getting more and more of these kind of reports, and by the end of it, that's when they start actually showing up. Now, I was gonna have this idea of them being this encroaching thing that was taking over system by system, but I didn't like that because that felt way too much like other established approaches. The way I'd go about it with this is that with this kind of species, this is meant to be the ultimate challenge of how well you understand the three pillars. So if you try and engage them directly, you could do that, but it's not going to be easy. And it's not going to be any easier trying to use the other two pillars because so much of what they are is going to frustrate. Because of the fact that you're going to have limited communication with them. The options that you have for diplomacy are going to be very limited because you're not even sure you can understand the way that they think,
Yeah.
even with all the studies on I don't know, let me bullshit a term, xenoanthropology or something like that.
Even
Yeah,
with all
I
the
just
studies and yeah.
Yeah, I pulled it out of my ass, but I needed some term, and yeah, and besides the idea that there would be entire studies of anthropology just dedicated to just first contact isn't out of the ordinary. Um, I would say in this regard with this particular type of species, and
Mhm.
I'm going until I can come up with a better name. I'm going to call them the specters. Eventually, there would be a mechanic referred to as specter activity when it comes to various sections on the quadrant map. The
Mhm.
idea being this is the frequency in which the spatial anomalies have been detected, and some of the high tier science, tactical, and diplomatic advances would be solely dedicated to dealing with specters, whether it be coming up with means to understand them to try and get a diplomatic advantage or something else. The game over is if they decide to get out if they decide to get all out hostile on you, because obviously you're dealing with something that can warp a lot more freely than any dilithium based technology can do. So they could just show up at your base in a heartbeat and wipe you out.
Yep.
I think that would make a very good story arc for this kind of thing. Plus, you can kind of utilize this to do something similar to the winter mechanic in Endless Legend, where when you know that there's going to be more activity, those particular areas aren't going to be able to be as productive to whatever goals you're trying to achieve at that given point in time. So I think I had thought about doing some sort of act-based structure when it comes to a narrative, but strategy games don't get along with that kind of approach. And I think this particular means of doing it works in a way so that it's definitely a threat, but it's one that isn't treading on too familiar ground, because it's not the Borg. These the people aren't being assimilated. It's not the Dominion. It's not trying to control people through a kind of fascist diplomacy. It is definitely not the Klingons or the Romulans, because it's not trying to use subterfuge, and it's definitely not trying to use outright hostile military conflict. It is a truly alien species.
Yep. It's not even the Cardassians.
Mm-hmm. Well, Cardassians would also fall into subterfuge in a different light, but the point. Well, the point is
subterfuge.
the I don't. Although I do want to make one thing clear when it comes to this species. As tempting as it may sound, the Spectres are not a Lovecraft-inspired type of alien. This is not something where if we see the full extent of it, we would go mad. It's more of they are taking the idea of something completely alien to how we understand things and throwing it on its head. Basically, what Q was trying to do by throwing the Borg at the Federation, except not stupidly.
Let's not forget that the only reason Q really did it was because he was bored.
It's fucking Q. What do you expect?
Not all of the Q are like that.
Not a.
Oh, no,
was
I'm just saying
bored.
it's this Q.
Yeah.
Yes, it's John Delancey. We know.
As an aside, I should note that I have had a running gag for the longest time where every role that John Delancey plays is part of the Q continuum.
I mean, that's actually a running gag for many people who have followed him.
And because of all that, the thing that I'd want to make absolutely clear is that despite it being outside of traditional understanding, this is not a outwardly hostile race unless you make it as one.
Unless you fuck up, then you should be fine.
If anything, I would say that they're a race of extreme curiosity. They have more in common with children.
I knew you were going to say that. How did I know you were going to say that?
Because you have to study me well to be the bane of my existence. But the thing is that I'd imagine that for them, subspace is quite literally their natural habitat, and what we would refer to as real space is them venturing out of it. I guess the way that I'd probably liken it to is is when humans go deep sea diving. They're entering a place that they can only be in for a restricted amount of time.
Ooh. Light bulb. What if the reason why they started coming out more frequently was because the combination of the Federation now showing up, and as a result, more and more people getting into warp technology has become exposed the Spectres to the fact that there is an outside. Maybe up until this point, they didn't even know such a thing existed. But now all of a sudden, all these other ships are flying through. Like, the hell's going on?
That I'd actually be willing to go with. Now I know there would be the obvious question of why hadn't these things appeared in other quadrants in the galaxy? I'd argue that
It's a simple answer, actually.
Those parts aren't in their habitat.
Even simpler than that, Fermi paradox.
I think I know where you're going with this, but for the sake of the audience, could you go on?
So, quick rundown. There's an equation made by an astrophysicist named Drake that determines how many intelligent, potentially spacefaring life forms could inhabit the galaxy. It calculates this out depending on specific factors that you plug in, and it could be as many as a few 100,000 or as small as just 1,000. The Fermi paradox comes to even if the Drake equation is true, why haven't we been contacted yet? In this case, these things have a habitat even less understood than normal space. So it's the Fermi paradox all over again. Maybe there's a bunch of things that exist in subspace that we've never discovered until these guys show up. Maybe there's only these guys. And if they do exist, how come they didn't contact us till now? It's just like how the Fermi paradox is in real life. Sometimes you just have to make enough waves for things to notice you. I'm sure some of the animals that now crowd around boats and ships out in the sea, at first we didn't know they existed until they came up to the surface, because the sounds and the motion of boats going through water disturbed them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's our parallel right there.
Yep. Now, if anyone's curious why I keep focusing on parallels so much, this ties into something that Chuck had once said regarding the right and wrong way to introduce a alien species. Now, if you want the specifics about where he discussed this was a preamble when he re-uploaded his review of Star Trek 4. Specifically as a lead-in to talk about why something like the whale probe makes no goddamn sense. You need to have one of two things, and I'm vastly simplifying what he talked about. I do recommend people watch that review, especially since all the movie reviews are back up. You need to have either an Earth analog, or you need to have a legitimate explanation. If you ideally have both. If you can't have both, have one or the other. He pointed out one race in a filler episode of Voyager, although calling a filler episode of Voyager, that is kind of self-defeating. Where
filler episode of a filler season, sure. Yeah.
I forget the name of this particular species or the character involved, but what I do remember is that it looked humanoid but had a strip of skin over its face, including over its mouth. And while that certainly looks alien, it also looks goofy because, well, that thing's going to get in the way when it tries to eat or talk. And with a lot of the stuff that we've established, there's things that we're drawing upon, things that we're making parallels with, so that it's something that people could legitimately wrap their head around.
Yeah.
And the only reason that I use the Spectre as this particular name is simply because that's the one that would best fit. I do have one question in regards to an expanding narrative. Would you or would you not have some of the other powers also try and claim a stake within the Delta Quadrant?
Maybe one other, but I wouldn't go any more than one, because otherwise you start muddying up the water a bit.
Who's the one that you're thinking of?
That's the hard part.
So I don't actually see most of the powers in known space wanting to go to Delta Quadrant for, well, reasons of sanity. The Romulans won't want to go because they know that most of the threats out there aren't going to fall for subterfuge. And while the Romulans do have some very, very powerful war weapons, they're not keen on sacrificing as part of their experimentation if they don't get anything out of it. Yeah, they'll sacrifice if they know that they're going to get something from it. But if it's just too much of an unknown, they're like, nope, screw that. Not enough reward for the cost. I don't see the Cardassians doing it simply because of the fact that the Cardassians wouldn't be able to just browbeat whatever's out there to do what they want. At most, I could see the Dominion, if the Dominion wasn't already pretty screwed over by what happened with DS9.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, the Dominion's pretty much good and dead at the end of DS9. You'd have to completely explain how they're back in power before you would even consider that idea.
Yeah. So for reasons of sanity and of essentially the other powers that be having their own vested interests doing the cost benefit analysis and going, let's let the Federation get the shit kicked out of them and we can see where they make mistakes and not do the same thing. Because that fits the Cardassians and the Romulans to a T.
What about
We've
the
already
Klingons?
Well, because we want to try and maybe give a racial slot to the Klingons, this can be seen as a joint venture between Klingon High Command and the Starfleet, if we haven't already established in the backstory that Klingon High Command was absorbed into Starfleet.
I'm not
One
I
or
don't
the
wanna
other.
Go with the, I don't want to go with the idea that they were absorbed. I'd say because
We're going with the culture exchange.
yeah, the only when it comes to the established ones, the only ones I could possibly see are the are roving bands of Klingons still looking for the sword of Kalis.
Yeah.
But even then, I'd probably just reduce that to a minor faction quest in other games.
Actually, there is one other race we've forgotten about. One that would easily consider doing whatever it takes to make a quick buck.
The Ferengi.
Oh God, no. God, no. Why would you do that?
Tell me you wouldn't be surprised to see a Ferengi out there.
I wouldn't be surprised, but I'd also just gun them down. They're reprehensible little shits. I hate them.
We all do. That's the fucking point. You're supposed to hate them. They're greedy bastards. But yeah, that they would do it.
I could see that being done, but not in the sense of a full faction.
That's
in the
fair.
quadrant, but more of a wild card in the sense that you know how we talked about the whole direct buy thing as a shortcut.
Yeah.
They could be the individual that can allow you to break the game's rules with a catch.
So basically, we would have our own equivalent to Quark in DS9.
Yeah, we'd use this would be a case where you know how in a lot of roguelikes your Binding of Isaacs, your Hades, that kind of thing. You have the option to buy certain perks with a catch. In the case of the Binding of Isaac, it deals with the devil. unless you feel like cheesing them by playing as the Lost, so you can do as many deals as you want because you can't sacrifice any health that you don't fucking have.
Yeah, that kind of comes with its own cost there.
Um,
As someone who is well versed with Binding of Isaac, like, yep.
Yeah, and in the case of Hades, that's represented with getting divine boons from Chaos.
Where you sacrifice a little bit of something and if you take one hit you die, and you have to kill so many enemies to get the actual boon out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Man, I love Hades, but fuck Chaos boons. Chaos boons can suck my kick.
All right, so bringing out a good idea. The bottom line is, it was a good thought.
Well, what I'm not saying it was a terrible thought. What I'm saying is the approach that I'm going with this is that there will be some sort of drawback to working with the Ferengi when you choose to do so, because obviously they're going to want to try and have
Try to get the best end of the bargain for themselves.
the best end of the bargain and the most profit for themselves. But the reason why I call them a wild card in this is that the kind of deal that they will make with you they're also going to be trying to make similar deals with other factions in the quadrant. Sometimes they may take it, sometimes they may not. The Ferengi would be utilized as a literal wild card in the dynamics.
Fucking monkey wrench.
Uh-huh.
So I can see the Ferengi going out there if they think there's a profit in it. The problem I have is even they have seen what the Borg can do and try never to get involved in anything the Borg are in. And they know that the Borg have a heavy presence out in the Delta Quadrant.
Mm-hmm.
So there'd have to be something out there that they know about that nobody else does. And maybe we could make that a side quest at some point. That is just drawing them out there, because otherwise even the Federation's going to go, what the fuck are they out here for?
Yeah. Although that brings something else. If we need to have there's one other possibility that could be used if we need to have that much of a wild card, and I would actually put this as a you know how in a lot of strategy games you can customize the base settings before you start play. This would be one of those things that you can checkbox, but it's going to give you a warning, and that is
The queue.
Yep, the queue.
I fucking knew it. I was like, I know what he's going to say next. I know what he's going to say next because I was already fucking thinking it. I was like, God fucking damn it.
You want about deals with the devil? Well, I think Q's got you covered right there.
I don't know about a deal with the devil. You're giving a deal with the Joker at that point, and I don't know what's worse.
To quote you, Shades, that's a good question. The answer is yes.
As much as I love John Delancey, I would have to, every time I saw him on the map, tell him to fuck off.
See, that's the thing. I don't think you can get John Delancey back. Like, if you got his likeness, then you'd have to get his voice. And, oh, actually, no, who am I kidding? He'd kill for the chance to come back.
He'd do it in a heartbeat, dude.
He would. That's more I thought about it. I was like, wait, no, he'd fucking do it in a heartbeat.
But the reason, of course, even if we can't get John Delancey, we can still get a part of the Q continuum, because it's not like he's the only game in town with where that's considered.
It's the only one that's funny.
Yeah, true. And actually, it would be more interesting if you had multiple Qs in the area who all had their own leanings.
Okay, that would be yeah. Make that a checkbox if you are involving the queue. Be warned: every queue has their own agenda, and some queues' agendas may be directly against others.
Yes. The reason why I was thinking of doing this whole warning thing is a bit of a callback to the missile defense games that I played on Mac as a kid, where there was an option to make the smart bombs invisible, and if you click on it, it says you are about to make a mistake. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this?
Yep, I remember that stuff.
And that's kind of the vibe that I'm going with this particular approach. Let's go with there being, since we seem to like using a trinity in this, let's go with that there are 3 Qs.
Oh God. That's already asking for trouble.
Oh, light bulb again.
Okay, Shades, what do you got for me?
Oh my God.
You bring up those 3 pillars, you gave me an idea.
Mm-hmm.
What if you had 3 separate Qs who each were attuned to one of those 3 pillars, and you had a side, you could optionally choose a side quest involving that Q that would give you a massive boon to, like, a massive resource gain, but at a cost. Or at
The other 2 Q fucking with you for the rest of the game.
I'm not gonna.
That
go
sounds
with
like
the
a
rest
cost.
I'm not gonna go with the rest of the game, but they probably fuck with you they probably try and fuck with you for a while. But the thing is with these 3 Qs is that they do not act directly.
I actually have a different idea there.
Go ahead.
The queue. I think that the queue should be tiered. Their boons should be tiered. And the reason for that is as follows. You have the queue giving you boons based on whatever their affinity is, whichever resource type and tech type their affinity falls in. But then we have Shade's big idea of the ultimate of that boon tree being something that gives you a huge advantage for a huge price. I think that depending on which one it is, one of those huge prices is to bring in the end game species early.
Go with the specters being far more active sooner than they're supposed to.
Yes. This goes back to some of my experience with some other 4X games that have end game scenarios that you have to work through. There are certain actions you can take within those games that give you huge advantages over the other AI player or even other players, but in so doing, you increase one of the end game scenarios. In this case, the Spectres coming in early is that consequence. They are all of a sudden very aware that someone is here because the queue that you're dealing with pissed off one of the other queue, or maybe they're just screwing with you because they're queue, because that's the queue. And they're like, okay, I really like you. Here's some help, but in return, let's see if you can deal with these guys. And they just instantly introduce you to the Spectres in some fashion or another. And in so doing, you may not have at that time the necessary prerequisites within your tech tree to have amicable dealings with them. So now you're in a race against time to get the right whichever of the three tech trees you want to focus on, the right skills to deal with these people and not get into a game over state. And that's the consequence of trusting the queue.
I would lean more towards having one of the other queues that you don't align with be the one to do that, because if you do it the way you just suggested, that's almost too similar to how the queue we all know introduced the Borg.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be, again, trying to avoid repetition here.
Well, when you're dealing with the queue, any of the queue could have done what Delancey's queue did. And
oh no, I agree. I'm just saying, like, let's not repeat the same story beats that have already been established.
Again, I'm just throwing stuff out there.
I know, and I'm just running with it. I like the idea in general. I'm just saying, let's just have one of the other queue decide. All right, so this is how we're gonna play. Okay.
Oh,
well,
so you went to them and you asked them for all this help. Well, here's my help.
Exactly.
Have a small fleet of these guys, like 10 ships.
That I can get behind.
And the third guy just goes, "Man, you guys took all the fun. Now I can't do anything to him. I mean, I could, but that just seems kind of mean." Make him sound like he's being sympathetic while also doing absolutely nothing to help you.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Well, if it's mean, then help me. Oh, I can't do that. Then they'll beat me up.
Exactly.
You Q are all the same.
Now, given all the stuff that we've established with this whole thing, with the fact that we have a trinity that we're working with, and we have the more controlled end of things, and we have the more uncontrolled end of things. The last thing is, what exactly would make a good title for this particular project? Delta Quadrant seems the most obvious, but on the other hand, it's also the most obvious.
Well, let's take the quadrant name out. just Star Trek Delta.
I don't know about that either. That
Yeah,
sounds a little too generic.
I guess I can see your point there. I'll just go with the whole idea of KSS. Keep it simple, stupid.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It just seems like it would fall down into a pit of generic and unnoticed. I mean, keeping Delta in the identity is a good idea because that lets people know that you're going to be working in Delta Quadrant. It also sounds cool. I mean, let's not be not be obtuse about it. Just putting Delta in the name is going to make it sound cooler, so long as we pick a good accompanying word.
Yeah.
So really, there.
See, I'm getting a few name ideas in mind, but nothing that really sticks out as that's what we need to go with. Because the other name that's floating in my head is Delta Discovery, but that just brings up some bad connotations I don't think we want to associate with this game.
Yeah, let's not bring up Discovery and say we didn't. Trying to think of a
Frontier.
Delta Frontier could be a good one.
No,
yeah,
not Delta Frontier. Frontier.
just Frontier.
Yeah.
But then you've got everybody thinking about Monster Hunter.
And that's a bad thing. How?
Well, then you're going to get Monster Hunter people buying this and returning it. Hold on.
Are you confession noted?
What? No, let's see. Because Star Trek likes their $5 words, shall we say. Delta Exigency.
I can go with that. Plus, it allows a bunch of Trekkies to pretend that they're smart.
Exactly. It appeals to the pseudo intellectuals in the community. We'll get some more sales on those saps for sure. See, I'd make a great marketer. God damn it!
It would be a case of the best and the worst.
Hey, as long as I'm doing my job and making myself some money.
Well, spoken like a true Ferengi there, sir.
What? No. Spoken like the Wolf of Wall Street. You got to push those numbers up. Them and rookie numbers.
Got to make them profits like a true Ferengi. You're not getting out of this one, pal.
Regardless, the point I'm making is that Delta Exigency, again, $5 word, appeals to the pseudo-intellectuals, and implies that there is something in Delta Quadrant that is going to cause tension and conflict, but you don't know what. Little bit of mystery, little bit of fun wordplay, because I like wordplay, and then bada bing, bada boom, we've got ourselves a title.
Yep. And I'd say that's as good of a spot as any to close off this little thought experiment. This ended up turning out a lot better and a lot more chaotic than I thought it might have. I think if this had just been about the video game curse, that would have been the shortest episode of GeekWatch that we've ever done. But fortunately, that's not how it went down.
We're smarter than that.
Yeah, the three of us know how to put our heads together for shit like this.
Mm-hmm. Now, I do have a bit of a short break when it comes to doing interviews. Some might argue it's deserved after working myself half to death for the last 10 months on the various interviews I've done. But on Friday, Zan Ash, and myself, and hopefully Doku.
If Doku shows up, my joke about him being latent gay is going to be the best thing ever. Every time he doesn't show, it gets another layer.
If he doesn't show, then it's probably going to be a case where he is so late and gay he's turned into RuPaul.
Oh!
Yeah,
Are you sure he hasn't? Are you sure he hasn't turned into Liberace at that point?
Give it a couple weeks.
Well, if we give it too many weeks, he'll turn into the Count of Saint Germain.
Or the Pope. The last time I played Crusader Kings. Yeah. Yes, I went there. I turned the Pope gay. Because it's Crusader Kings and it's where historical realism goes to die horribly.
Except for the fact that if anybody inbreeds ever, you get the ugliest babies with the most health problems. That's the one historical accuracy they kept.
Probably because of the hilarity.
Yes, hemophilia kills your heir at the age of 2.
Yeah, but of course, we will be back in a week's time for a new episode of GeekWatch, and this Saturday on the 27th, the return of Monastery Gazette, where we'll cover all the news and all the locales of that particular week. And let's see what's that's gonna be fun next week. Folks,
Yes.
folks, next week we got something special for you. so be sure to tune into that bit of insanity. And of course, there's gonna be plenty of projects and plenty of insanity in the coming months. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty and join